il bouge pas. Et c'est un peu... c'est rapide, hein? Pointer là-bas ou... non? Comment on fait pour... Okay, great. Very good. Very good indeed. Okay, Marie, thanks a lot. Marie is the Chief Technology Officer today. Well, okay, on the top of other responsibilities. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Jean-Michel Beacco. Some of you know me. I'm responsible of Institut du Bachelier, which shares this risk forum today. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you for this 18th edition of the Financial Risks International Forum, also known as the Risk Forum. This conference is a key event for us at Institut du Bachelier and our network of around 300 academics, 100 practitioners, and several public institutions. The topic of the 2025 edition is shaping financial research, quite a topic and actually quite a marathon for today's. A bit of history. The Risk Forum is now 18 years old. It never stopped despite COVID being organized by Institut du Bachelier and its two foundations, especially Institut Europe de Finance, with the rigor ensured by a dedicated scientific committee chaired by Marie Brière. Thank you, Marie, again. This committee carefully refines the program and selects the most compelling submissions from our call for papers. What about the mission? This Risk Forum aims to highlight the challenges in risk management and regulation brought by ongoing progress in financial methodologies and technologies, as well as to discuss sustainable solutions. Today and tomorrow, more than 50 speakers from around the globe, and I have counted around 20 nationalities, will share their views on financial risks right here in this magnificent setting of the Chambre de Commerce et d'Industrie de Paris during this beautiful Parisian spring. During the past years, we have been exploring climate risk, green transition, and the vibrant relationships between finance and society. Last year's edition focused back on big data and algorithmic finance, and this year we take another step forward with the theme shaping financial research, data, AI, and new challenges. This theme aligns with two major research streams at ILB, embodied by two international programs. The Finance and Insurance Reloaded program, shared by Marie Brière, again, aim to support and encourage innovations resulting from new technologies ranging from AI to blockchain in the finance and insurance sectors. And the PARC Foundation, which is a research and data collaboration platform shared by Stéphane Voisin, designed to make sustainable finance a key response to global climate change and sustainability challenges, with the help of Peter Tankoff. I've seen him as well. This edition will examine how financial research has evolved over the past decades, ahead or behind, given the changing needs of the industry. Over the past 40 years, financial and insurance research has been deeply transformed by computerization, i.e. technological advancements, enabling quantitative finance to develop more sophisticated and precise models, and globalization, alongside financial crises, which have shaped our understanding of risk management, regulation, as well as financial stability. The 2008, back to the crisis, was a turning point that revealed the urgent need to better assess risks, and design more robust financial regulations. In response, the French Treasury from Ministry of Finance, together with André Lévilang, our chairman, and a couple of fellows, founded the Institut Bachelier, being nowadays the biggest virtual university for sponsored research in Europe. Our goal is to ensure that the financial industry remains deeply engaged in research, capable of addressing systemic challenges and contributing to a more stable and sustainable financial system. Just as financial research had to be reinvented after 2008, today we are once again at the crossroads. The rapid evolution of AI, decentralized finance, and massive data sets present both unprecedented opportunities and a lot of systemic risks. How do we learn from past crises to build a financial ecosystem that is not only more efficient, but also more resilient? Recently, the rise of AI, large language models, as well as decentralized finance, has introduced new tools to forecast, optimize, and assess risks. At ILB, we work daily on these issues, as our goal is to produce and promote high-impact scientific research in finance and economics, both fundamental and applied, thanks to our team of engineers. A glimpse of the program. Marie will give you full details about the program of this intensive 1.5 day. I will just thank in advance the two guest speakers, Professors Lin William Cong, who will intervene distantly, and David Hirschleifer, still in office, if I'm not mistaken. They are both coming from the United States, the country of research, seen from France, which will always welcome you with pride and open arms. I also want to mention a new initiative in a talk format, which will highlight some of ILB's latest initiatives in green and sustainable finance, mainly green data, run by our engineers from the labs. This is going to be tomorrow at 12:30. Last but not least, tomorrow at 1 p.m. we will unveil the best young the best young researcher in finance and insurance award, thanks to the support of the Fondation SCORE pour la Science and Philippe Trenat. Before concluding, I want to express my profound gratitude to all the speakers and participants for their immeasurable contributions to this forum and to our shared pursuit of research and research excellence. Marie Brière, again and again, Christian Gorierou, and the scientific committee, as well as the organizing committee, for their dedication to making this 18th edition a success. Our partners and sponsors, whose engagement is crucial to this event, and I'm very glad to see, it's no more on the, it's here on the poster. I'm really glad to see sponsors coming to this, to sponsor this forum, and more generally to sponsor the Institut Europe de Finance Foundation. And of course, a special thank to the ILB team for their efforts in organizing this conference, all the team, as well as the Chambre de Commerce et d'Industrie d'Île-de-France for its continued support in hosting us for 18 years. No, 17, because COVID was distant. It is unfortunately the last year we will meet here because the building has been sold, unfortunately, to a luxury brand from LVMH Group. Sorry about this, but everything, even good things have an end. Thanks again, the CCE, because you've been absolutely remarkable for the last 18 years, basically. I encourage all of you to actively participate in these discussions, challenge ideas, and engage with your peers. The real value of this forum is here. It comes from the intellectual exchanges and challenges we foster here, shaping the future of financial research together. As a conclusion, I'm delighted to open this forum, the 18th edition, and Marie, floor is now yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean-Michel, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Chairwoman of the Scientific Committee, it is my great pleasure to welcome you as well to this 18th edition of the Financial Risk International Forum, organized by the Louis Bachelier Institute. So as we gather here, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment in the evolution of the financial industry. Over the past 50 years, we have witnessed a remarkable transformation driven by technological advances, globalization, and the lesson learned from the financial crisis. The rise of quantitative finance, propelled by unprecedented computing power, has enabled us to develop sophisticated models that enhance our understanding of financial markets and instruments. But today, we stand at the beginning of another revolution of financial research, fueled by the advance of new data sets and technologies. The emergence of large language models, the development of alternative data sources, the wider use of machine learning has opened up new avenues for forecasting, optimizing, assessing risk. But also decentralized finance has emerged as a transformative force of the financial system, promoting global financial integration, reducing the power of intermediaries. So the theme of this year's forum, Shaping Financial Research, Data, AI, and New Challenges, invites us to evaluate the advancements in our field and to consider the trajectory of financial research in light of the evolving needs of the industry. There are a number of questions we're going to tackle during these 2 days. How can we leverage the power of LLMs for financial analysis, and what are the risks associated with its use? What impact do trading algorithms have on financial markets, market efficiency, and stability? How can tokenized assets and smart contracts reshape trade and settlement processes? And importantly, how do we navigate the challenges posed by the growing influence of fintechs and the implications for future financial regulation? Moreover, we must not overlook the importance of interdisciplinary research, which is something which is at the heart of Institut Bachelier. And in particular, the intersection of finance with climate research, psychology, sociology, marketing presents rich opportunities for exploration and innovation. I would like to express my gratitude to our 2 keynote speakers. Will Cong, Professor of Finance at Cornell University, will discuss today how LLMs like ChatGPT can enhance loan application quality and discuss the impact of LLM adoption on soft information and credit misallocation. Will was unfortunately not authorized to travel, and the recent political developments in the US are not completely unrelated to this, so we are very happy to have you online, Will. We are also extremely honored to have with us David Hirschleifer, who is Professor of Finance at the Marshall School of Business at the University of Southern California, and who is a pioneer in behavioral and social finance. And tomorrow, you shouldn't miss this talk, David will discuss how the social transmission of public news affects investors' beliefs, trading, and securities market. This conference, as highlighted by Jean-Michel, serves as a vital platform to bridge the gap between academia and the financial industry, in particular professionals including supervisors, bank and insurance representatives, industry experts, and it's fostering collaboration between these two worlds. So let me thank as well all presenters and discussants for being here today. So I would like to thank you very warmly for your participation. I would like to thank all participants. You're every year even more numerous. I think we have 560 registered people over the 2 days for this conference. Let me thank our sponsors, Natixis and Euronext in particular. Of course, the members of the scientific committee, and a special thanks to Christian Gourierou, for your very important role in the selection process, but also Michel Crouhy and Paul Besson for organizing 2 sessions during the event. This conference couldn't exist without Institut Bachelier, so a big thank you to Jean-Michel, Jean-Michel Beacco, and also an outstanding team, and I would like to thank Samia, Afida, Feriel, Riyad, Mourad for their invaluable contributions to the event's organization. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Michel Crouhy. Michel is senior advisor at Natixis, and he will chair the first session. So Michel, the floor is yours.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. My name is Michel Crouhy. I'm a senior advisor at Natixis and the president of the scientific committee of the Natixis Foundation for Research and Innovation. So the Natixis Foundation has been a sponsor of this event for the last 18 years. We've been a faithful sponsor. Welcome to the first plenary session with 2 parts. First, our guest speaker, Professor Lin William Cong, will make his address. And it will be followed by a panel of, on the theme AI and the Sustainable Dilemma. I'll introduce the panelists after the presentation of Professor Cong. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Lin William Cong. Professor Cong is the Rudd Family Professor of Management and the Professor of Finance at the Cornell University. And Professor Cong will join us through Zoom since he was unable to get a visa to attend this event. That's really unfortunate. Professor Cong is a founding faculty director for the FinTech initiative and the founder of the Digital Economy and the Financial Technology Lab, the DEFT Lab at Cornell. Professor Cong is an editor of Management Science and a senior research fellow at the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research. Professor Cong's research spans a wide range of areas, financial economics, information economics, AI for finance, FinTech, the digital economy, entrepreneurship, and innovation. That's a lot. Professor Cong has been published in top academic journals and is a regular contributor to the BBC, Bloomberg, CNN, and The Economist. So Professor Cong's allocution is on writing quality on soft information in the generative AI age, evidence from the online credit markets. Professor Cong will discuss how writing quality of online loan applications and the emergence of large language models affect lending decisions and credit allocation. Now, the use of chat GPT by loan applicants induces convergence in writing and leads to a systematic gap between the perceived and actual loan risk, increasing the likelihood of credit misallocation. So Professor Cong, you'll have 25 minutes for your presentation and 5 minutes for questions after your speech. I was going to invite you to participate to the roundtable, but I guess it's going to be too complicated for you. Thank you very much. And you can start your presentation now.
Thank you. Thank you. Bonjour à tous. It's a great pleasure to join the program. I really wish I could be there in person, but hopefully we can still have a good conversation about this topic. The paper I'm going to focus on is writing quality and self-information in the GenAI age. I'm going to use online credit market, online lending market as a laboratory for that. But before I do that, I actually want to introduce the background, talking about generative modeling, generative AI, using LLMs, but going beyond pulling large language models off the shelf for simple predictions, right? So let me just backtrack a little bit to introduce the background. So generative AI is definitely AI. So what are the core themes of modern AI? Now, if you go back to the 1950s, when people first started to define AI, for example, John McCarthy was saying AI is technologies that allow us to solve complex tasks that require human intelligence. Then the question boils down to what is intelligence? What is human intelligence? That's also solving complex problems and emphasize achieving goals in a uncertain, fast evolving, complex environment. So I would claim modern AI is really about going from instruction-driven automation and prediction, which we've seen plenty, right? Computers, calculator, these are all automations that are very powerful, but we rarely associate them with intelligence. We've seen a lot of machine learning-based predictions, which is great. But if you look at AlphaGo, AlphaFold, self-driving machine translation, large language models, they are not about instruction-driven automation of simple predictions. They are about goal-oriented optimization in a large modeling space. So that's something I would claim as one core theme of modern AI. What do I mean by a large modeling space? Well, if you think about deep learning, large neural nets, or large models with millions or even billions of parameters, that's a large modeling space that we typically, as economists, have not explored before, right? For various reasons. We want interpretability, and statisticians told us more parameters will overfit, but that has been proven empirically not to be the case. So that's one core theme. Another core theme, of course, you've been witnessing over the past few years is generative modeling, especially large language models as a representative of generative AI. Now, the ways that AI has been evolving over the past decade or two, in my view, can be categorized into 4 directions, not mutually exclusive. The first direction is that we're going to larger models. Fine, we need to use greater computation, and many models aim at getting general intelligence. That's not necessarily what we need as economists or financial economists. We have specific tasks. We don't need the financial analyst to be an artist painter at the same time. So this is something we can explore, but we are not at an advantage due to computation constraints that we typically have. Now, with larger models, of course, we need more data. And even without larger models, with greater digitization, we have more alternative and unstructured data. The truth is, at least in finance and in many social science studies, the data we have are very limited relative to natural language or images. Even for natural language and images, we are running out of publicly available data, and it's a gray area whether these large language models are legally using the data that they can find. That's fine. But again, that's not something we have a huge advantage relative to our computer science or data science colleagues. I'm going to keep 1 and 2 as given, right? We're just going to use larger models than our traditional financial models, but not too large. It's nothing compared to large language models. And we're going to keep the data set that we typically use in finance or economics. Now, 3 and 4 would be more interesting. 3 is exploring this idea of goal-oriented optimization. Now, in computer science, reinforcement learning is the de facto algorithm over there. It's trial and error, approximate dynamic programming. And if you come from econ background, it's essentially a multi-arm bandit problem, right? We are in this large modeling space. We try some parameters. If it's working well, we explore more. We exploit what we have learned. If it's not working well, we're going to move away from that and explore something that we haven't tried. We can't do a full search in the large modeling space because it's too big. And I can mention one example, right? Think about how we generate test assets or investment portfolios. We use double sort, right? From double sort. We use single securities, univariate security sorting. We rarely go beyond triple sort. But in terms of predictors, we have 60, 70 predictors associated with the assets. So the large modeling space would be a full sequential and simultaneous sorting, security sorting space. But that's too much computation for our typical modeling. And what we do is we can actually use some clever algorithms to search within that space to find a good solution in order to come up with good test assets, in order to come up with good factors for pricing assets, so on and so forth. And in terms of generative modeling, I'm going to argue that it's especially suitable for social science research. And today, when I come to the online lending part, that's an example of where we can fully explore and take advantage of the power of generative modeling. So it's not just for prediction tasks. It actually allows us to analyze counterfactual equilibria that we just couldn't analyze before. At least we couldn't do that in a data-driven manner. Now we can do it in a data-driven manner. So that's what I'm going to focus on. In terms of existing studies of AI and machine learning in finance, a lot of that is focused on return prediction. So it's a prediction exercise. A lot of them are focusing on supervised learning. Again, that's not the core theme of AI over the past 15 years. Supervised learning requires you to know historical X and Y variables and figure out their relationship. Now, in generative modeling, in goal-oriented search, you don't require the data to be labeled, right? You may not have historical Y variable labeled. And it's really about jointly thinking about the data generating processes for both X variables and Y variables. I'll come to that in a little bit. And when I say something not being labeled, what I mean by that is if you're doing return prediction, we can use historical returns as the correct label for asset returns. But if we are maximizing, say, cumulative return for 12 months, subject to never losing 50% of my assets under management, that objective is neither observed in firm fundamental data nor in market signals, right? So it's unlabeled historically. Yet we can use algorithms such as reinforcement learning to help solve that. So safe to say that current applications of machine learning in finance, they can handle big data, they can handle high dimensionality, but they are not fully exploring the power of goal-oriented search and generative modeling. And in corporate finance, we use a lot of textual analytics. Typically, we take them off the shelf. The use of large language models, ChatGPT is one example, but we can do more. Hopefully, I can convince you that we can do more. Now, in terms of goal-oriented search, there are mainly, at least we've found there are mainly 2 directions to explore. One is to use what computer scientists have been focusing on, reinforcement learning. It's about interacting with the environment, getting the feedback, and refine your policy. Go back to the environment, get the feedback. In the interest of time, I wouldn't get to the details, But here at least two applications that we've had in portfolio management as well as in corporate decision making for managerial decisions. The first one was actually first written in 2019. These are the first generative AI models in finance that's non-text based. And if you're interested, you can take a look. For example, for portfolio management, the idea is, for a given goal, portfolio management goal, how do we generate the portfolio? How do we generate the strategy? And I'll tie this to generative modeling in a little bit. This is one direction. Another direction that's less treaded by computer scientists is to use trees. Trees are also exhibiting some sort of human intelligence because trees are solving the problems by dividing and conquering it. And that's how humans solve complex problems. And trees have a set of nice properties. The issue with tree-based models is that off-the-shelf, plain vanilla tree models, they are not designed for social science research per se. Namely, when you grow the tree, you are using local statistical criteria. When we split one parent node into two child nodes, we are maximizing some, we're minimizing some estimation error only using the data in that node, and that tends to give overfitting. And what we do is we use ensembles, we use random forests to average out noise, but then you lose interpretability because you're superimposing 500 different trees into a random forest. And also it's guided by a statistical criteria. So what we can do as economists is we can tweak the tree model structure. And for that, I introduced a set of models called panel trees. The idea is we can accommodate the panel data nature of financial data or economic data. At the same time, we can use an economic criteria, economic goal to guide the growth of the tree, to avoid overfitting, to retain interpretability, and also to optimize an economic objective. What type of economic objectives? Well, suppose I want my test portfolios, test assets, to be better spanning the efficient frontier. Then my criteria would be, all the leaf portfolios, when properly combined in a mean invariant optimization, they can have a higher Sharpe ratio auto sample. That could be the economic criteria, but that's flexible. And again, here are a list of a series of papers exploring panel trees for generating test assets, for generating heterogeneous factor models, and also for generating the largest separation in terms of return predictability in order for us to figure out what assets would group together to be the most predictable in terms of returns. And all these are data-driven rather than human-specified. Not my focus for today, but I just want to mention there are many things that we can do beyond textual analysis or language models. Now, coming back to generative modeling, statisticians would classify models into discriminating models and generative models. Discriminating models would be given X variables, we're trying to figure out Y. And typically that's done through supervised learning. That's what we've been doing as economists for most of our research. Generative models, however, try to analyze the joint distribution of X and Y. I'm not going to take the X variables as given. I will actively think about how X variables are generated. Now, there are finer categories of generative models, including conditional generative models. Given Y, how can I generate X? And goal-oriented search is essentially a form of generative modeling. It's a goal-oriented generative modeling. The idea is given Y, given that I want to maximize Y, how should I generate X? Now, if we're talking about a simple return prediction, in discriminating models, the X variables would be the firm characteristics, the macro variables, Y would be the expected return. But if you're talking about generative modeling, the Y would be the economic objective that we have. which is very flexible. And the X variable is no longer the firm characteristics. X variable would be the portfolio weights, would be the trading strategy. And these live in very large modeling space, right? In terms of the type of trading strategies we have, in terms of the combinations of assets, underlying assets for portfolio generation. So that's a very large modeling space. And we have to use either reinforcement learning or tree-based search to generate X in order to maximize the Y. And that's how these things are tied together. I probably don't have time to go over why generative modeling, goal-oriented search are particularly suitable for social science, except I'll mention one thing. Typically in economic studies, if we want to analyze a counterfactual equilibrium, we have to rely on theory models, because the equilibrium being counterfactual means it's a new environment, under a new policy, we don't have data under that environment. We have historical data, but that's under a different environment. So we try to write down theory models, we try to write down structural models that are theory-based, typically. And we have to argue the theory models capture the deep parameters in order to, counter-argue any Lucas type of critique. Now we have a data-driven way to analyze counterfactual equilibrium, and that's enabled by generative AI. And that's the power of generative modeling. You can generate data, then you can think about how agents in that economy would react to the counterfactual data generated. And then you can think about equilibrium analysis. And that has not been done before in the literature, in the economic literature. So that's something I'm hoping to illustrate through this online lending example. So I think I have about 10 minutes. So let me go through this specific paper I have in mind. It's about the core question here is, if people start to use large language models, what is the counterfactual equilibrium for online lending, right? We know historical data so far, except for the past 2 years, are not generated in this environment. So there's a limit we can learn from historical data. Yet we can still carry out this type of analysis in a data-driven manner. So, so just a quick overview of what we do here. We first verify that historically, writing better for online loan applications helps with loan fundability, but it's more nuanced. It does depend on the credit score of the borrowers. So there's rich interaction over there. Using large language models such as ChatGPT can improve writing quality. And historically, writing well has been treated by high credit borrowers as substitutes. Yet empirically, they are really complements. And a good analogy here would be, say we're talking about college admissions. If you have a high SAT score, typically people might say, oh, well, I don't have to work as hard on my personal essay. But empirically, using past data, we can demonstrate that for those with high SAT scores, their marginal benefit of writing a better personal essay is even bigger. Okay, but these are just historical analysis. I have not touched on counterfactual equilibrium yet. Now we can think about what happens if borrowers start to use large language models to complete their loan applications. What we find is that, yes, their fundability would improve conditional on the lenders don't adjust their models based on the new data that would be generated. And that's going to lead to a decrease of the utility of self-information that's going to create more misallocation of credit. Now, if you allow the lenders to respond when they face new data generated with the help of large language models, they're going to shift the focus from self-information to hard information. And they can mitigate this misallocation somewhat, not completely, but partially. And from there, we can talk about how we search for a fixed point in order to analyze the counterfactual equivalent. Hopefully, I'll get to that in a little bit. The data we use are taken from Prosper.com before the financial crisis, and it's the largest marketplace lending. And typically, the borrowers would list their loan applications, and if they receive enough interest from lenders, the loan is funded. And once it's funded, we can track whether the loan eventually defaulted or paid. What is nice about this setting is, this is the loan application, loan listing, right? You put down the amount, the duration, the maximum interest rate you want to pay, and importantly, there's a description text box. That's the only place where self-information is communicated. That's what's so clean about online lending. Okay, that's not quite the case for general bank lending when people, interact in person, and there are other ways to transfer self-information. So why is generative AI helpful here? Well, think about how loan borrowers can generate data using large language models. They would go to ChatGPT and ask it to polish the language to increase the probability of funding. And as econometricians, that's what we can do as well. So we can essentially simulate the loan applications. So suppose I take a past loan application. I can do the rule setting, rule setting, so on and so forth, the proper prompts, and then generate a new loan application. And here's an example, right? The original application versus the rewritten or GPT-generated application. As I said, we first verify historically writing better helps, and ChatGPT indeed improves writing. Now, writing quality has multiple dimensions. We take a few from the linguistics literature. We also introduce a composite score that's called Writing Quality Index. Basically, we look at the GPT-generated text and the original text. If they are very similar, using some cosine similarity metric, that means the original writing is of high quality. The implicit assumption is that the GPT-generated writing is of high quality. And that's something we actually verify by looking at the writing dimensions. We also conduct human-based experiments. So here's the writing quality index metric. It's fairly standard semantic similarity. You do the word embedding first, and once you have the vectors representing the textual information, you calculate their cosine similarity. So we do an online experiment with humans, ask them to rate the writing quality of GPT-generated applications versus the original applications, ask them to indicate their willingness to lend. And indeed, GPT-generated applications are perceived as with better writing quality, and people are more willing to lend. That's just a confirmation. And indeed, the GPT writing improves along multiple dimensions in terms of writing quality. Okay, for example, they write more formally, they have a more positive tone, the length typically slightly increase because the applicants historically didn't fully use the word limit in the application form. And what's interesting is that for low credit borrowers, so for high credit borrowers, when they improve writing quality, the fundability also goes up. But for low credit borrowers, when they improve writing quality, at least measured by this composite quality score, after controlling for other characteristics of the loans, it actually goes down. That's just what's in the historical data. It's a little bit like, if you have very low SAT score, standardized test score, and you try so hard to write your personal essay, the admission officers find that a little bit fishy. You must be, getting some help from other people. That's our interpretation, but that it is what it is in the data. Okay, but that's only the borrower perspective. We haven't talked about how lenders would react in such a setting. So the way we do this is now we have this generated loan application data. We can analyze lenders' decision in a data-driven manner. And that's how lenders make decisions in reality, right? They look at the past applications, they figure out what type of borrowers they should lend to. It's a data-driven decision process. And to do that, we have to build a lender model. So what we did is we built a multimodal lender model using BERT or Roberta that can allow us to analyze text information as well as numerical information and their interactions. Now, historical loans doesn't allow us to observe their quality if the loan applications were not funded. So we have to do some sort of Heckman correction, right, to deal with the selection bias. Now, Heckman correction wasn't developed for multimodal deep learning models, and we have to introduce so-called deep Heckman correction, which is not too hard to do, but that's what we did conceptually. So we can see there's three scenarios. When lenders don't react, that's pre large language model era. When borrowers start to use large language models, but lenders don't react, that's small scale adoption. Basically, they feel, okay, I don't have to adjust my lending model because not many people are using large language models. So what that means is the lenders train their model on historical data, and then we talk about their performance on the newly generated data with the help of GPT, right, for borrowers. And large-scale adoption would mean the lenders respond to the new data generated. They train their model on the new data, and we talk about performance in the test sample, also from the generated data. So self-information is defined as the utility of using the text versus not using the text. And what we find is that in terms of fundability, the left panel shows, the horizontal axis is the original fundability of a particular type of loan, and vertical axis is their fundability once the borrowers use ChatGPT, but the lenders don't fully respond. So you can see more loans are being funded. The red panel goes from lenders not responding to lenders responding. So when lenders adjust their model in response, the fundability gets adjusted back a little bit. So there are still more loans being given out because the writing has been improved, but not as much as the situation when lenders don't respond. And in terms of misallocation, we also see let's look at the return on investment for lenders, right? When there's small adoption, the utility of self-information is pretty high. But when we allow lenders to adjust their model, they can even do better on return on investment. And here's the decomposition between the use of self-information in gray color versus hard information in purple color. So you can see lenders, when they don't adjust their model, they rely too much on self-information compared to what they did historically. But once they adjust their model, they rely more on hard information because they know the writing has converged. There's not as much discriminating or distinguishing information that they can draw and extract from the text. So I'll just talk about one more slide and I'll take some questions. And this is the credit misallocation situation. With small adoption, there's increased misallocation and reduced ROI, but once the lenders adjust, they recover the ROI somewhat, and the misallocation is mitigated in such a situation. But so far, that's not equilibrium analysis, right? We're just talking about lenders' response, assuming what the borrowers would do. So here is a way that we can analyze the counterfactual equilibrium. And let me just go to this slide directly. So basically, we can treat borrowers as generative agents. They make some high-level decisions, such as, do I use GPT or not? And we can generate the data, the application data. Borrowers are discriminative agents. They face the data, they train their model to maximize some objective, maximize their profit. So they are data-driven discriminative agents in the economy. So the way we can analyze the equilibrium is, suppose we conjecture 20% of the borrowers would adopt ChatGPT. Then we take the, because high credit borrowers tend to use this more, they have more marginal benefit using ChatGPT. So we take the top 20% based on credit score of borrowers, generate their loan applications using ChatGPT. Then we take 80% loan applications drawn through some sort of resampling from historical data. Now you have the generated data in the counterfactual equilibrium. And we then train the lender's model based on that data. You have lender's optimal response in that counterfactual situation. Then you go back to the 20th percentile borrower. You ask the borrower, do you prefer to use ChatGPT? Right? If that agent is indifferent, that's an equilibrium point. If that agent isn't, we search the next fixed point, right? 21% adoption, 22% adoption. And here I'm just plotting different credit groups, how much their payoff would improve when they use ChatGPT. When ChatGPT's cost is very low for borrowers to use, it turns out that the unique equilibrium, monotone equilibrium, is the one where everyone is adopting, and we have analyzed that equilibrium. That's where that's the large adoption equilibrium, right? And we can talk about equilibrium, misallocation, so on and so forth. That's pretty much what I have to say, right? Here, I really hope to illustrate the power of generative modeling. You can generate data, you can generate actions that our traditional theory models couldn't, right? For theory model, what do? You say the borrowers use or not use large language models, but it doesn't generate the data. Therefore, you cannot analyze lender's response in a data-driven manner. And here, you're essentially using data-driven approach to macro-fund, to simulate bottom-up the economy. And then from there, you can analyze equilibrium outcomes. I think this applies to many other situations. Currently, I'm working on patenting, right? What happens if innovators start to use AI tools for patent applications? Well, you can analyze the counterfactual equilibrium. So I'll stop here. I know I probably went over for a couple of minutes. I'm happy to take any questions related to generative modeling, broadly speaking, or this particular study.
Thank you, Professor Cong. We have time just for a couple of questions. I have one. Given what you said, why not to forget about credit quality and just rely on credit score the whole way, like FICO score, for loan application?
Yes. So if we ignore the textual information or alternative information and just use hard metrics such as credit score, from lenders' perspective, they perform worse. So there is informational gain that they have when using alternative data, when using soft information. I think that's not too surprising. And from a social welfare perspective, that also leads to more misallocation in terms of type 1, type 2 errors in lending. So that's why we model this as multimodal decision making. There's both soft information coming from the text, and there's hard information coming from characteristics, credit scores, so on and so forth.
Thank you. Marie? Okay. Yeah, okay.
So thanks for a very interesting presentation. I had a question about the implications in terms of inequalities, because I think you have very interesting results showing that depending on the borrower quality, you can have different outcome. And you might think that the adoption rate of LLM might be also very different depending on the quality of the borrower. So simply speaking, I mean, low-income people, I mean, low-quality borrowers might adopt less LLM as well, and this might maybe also exaggerate the heterogeneous impacts of the LLM adoption impact. So more generally, so apart from your model, what's your view on the impact of the adoption of AI, and in particular generative AI, on the finance availability for low-income people? So what's your view on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in this paper, we barely touched the surface, right, of the heterogeneity part. Adoption is going to be heterogeneous, and the way generative AI affects the human agents are going to be heterogeneous. There is a fast emerging literature on how generative AI affect labor, affect work. This recent paper coming out of QJE about AI, generative AI. And I've been looking into how AI co-pilots affect the real estate market, the housing market, when realtors start to use these tools. And it turns out that the lower quality realtors benefit more from this. I think it's going to be case by case, industry by industry, but we know very little overall. And I think, you know, inclusion, inequality as being shaped, affected by the emergence of such a general purpose technology, right? AI is very interesting, and that's where economists can contribute a lot. It's not a technical computer science question. It's a really socio-economic question.
Thank you. Another question?
Yes, I have one. On the first part of your presentation, you used trees to discriminate or to find the root variables in your portfolio. But trees usually use distance, so you try to use a smaller distance. But then, in this case, how can you diversify your portfolio?
Great question, right? Traditional trees or plain vanilla trees off the shelf tend to use some distance measure, some statistical measure when growing the tree, right? And here is how we differ. We use a global economic criteria to grow the tree. For example, right, I use all the leaf portfolios generated, and the economic criteria I use is auto-sample Sharpe ratio of the mean variant combination of these portfolios. That's utilizing all the data. Or I can use the criteria maximizing the likelihood of seeing the heterogeneous returns when fitting a uncommon factor model. And because we're utilizing all the data rather than just data within a particular branch of the tree, we actually reduce overfitting. We reduce the idiosyncratic noise because we are averaging out the noise somewhat. So that's helping. And in terms of portfolio diversification, well, the test portfolios, the leaf portfolios are what's going to best span the efficient frontier. So in a way, within each portfolio, it's reasonably diversified. We can also insert some criteria. For example, for each leaf portfolio, there shouldn't be less than 30 assets, just to ensure there's some minimum diversification within that portfolio for practical purposes, right? So these are things that researchers, portfolio managers can introduce into the overall architecture of tree-based algorithms.
Thank you. Maybe time for another question, the last one. Yes?
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. In 2008, we had a major crisis due to bad borrowing and bad lending, particularly coming from the US. So with the current AI and models, could we have prevented that crisis? And now we're in 2025. Where is the next crisis for borrowing coming from the governments, companies, or private people? And which private people? Students, whatever.
That's a very profound question. This is about predicting crisis, predicting large systemic risks. Historically, people have tried. That's hard. In time series, we have limited data, and it's just very difficult to predict. Now, if we take the same top-down approach in terms of modeling and predicting crisis, I think AI models or machine learning models can help somewhat, but it's not going to be a panacea for the problem. However, there's a new route that I personally think is very promising, that is more bottom-up. Basically, AI agent-based modeling. You can simulate the economy more effectively with the greater computation and greater intelligence that these AI agents are exhibiting. And with agent-based simulation, what is important is, even though we can specify the individual behavior or delegate that to be generated by some sort of generative AI, there can still emerge macroeconomic aggregate phenomena that are hard to predict. So if we run enough simulations, maybe at least we can see some possible crises showing up. We can have an idea on how to deal with that. And if in many of the simulations we see crisis emerging, I think that's a red flag, that's a warning sign. At least this new approach might add to our toolkit in terms of predicting crisis.
Thank you, and let me thank you very much for your remarkable presentation. And we're going to move to the thank you to move to the roundtable.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks for all the questions and comments.
I'll ask the panelists to join me here on the scene. So let me introduce the panelists. First, just a few words of introduction. The roundtable is on a controversial topic, AI on the sustainable dilemma, which one of the topics discussed at the recent AI Paris Summit. Also at this summit was launched the Coalition for a Durable AI. On the one hand, AI offers a wide range of benefits across various sectors, but on the other hand, AI and the data centers it requires for its implementation has a significant impact on the environment through its consumption of electricity and water. Not to forget the pollution generated by the recycling of hardware, such as computer chips, that can release harmful chemicals into the environment. I found a recent article in the Financial Times mentioning that the public health costs in the US of treating illnesses connected to pollution is estimated to, this type of pollution is estimated to at $5.4 billion since 2019. It's quite a lot. And the challenge going forward is to make hardware and the software greener to reduce the environmental impact. So to discuss these issues, we have a panel of distinguished academic and professionals. First, Olivier Pironneau, Emeritus Professor at Sorbonne University in Applied Mathematics and a member of the French Academy of Science, where he also is a member of the Energy Committee of the Academy. So Olivier will start by giving us an overview of the environmental impact of digital activities, including cryptocurrencies. And Olivier will also discuss the recent scientific progress on hardware, software, and renewable energies. Then Gabriel Ferrat, who is the head of impact on ESG at Mirova. And Mirova positions itself as a global sustainable investor. So Gabriel will give us Mirova positioning on AI and discuss the practical implementation of this position as an investor. Next, will be followed, Gabriel will be followed by Laetitia Fournier. Laetitia is head of data and innovation at Natixis CIB, corporate and investment bank. And Laetitia will discuss AI in bank transformation and the optimization of IT footprint. Finally, Loïc Lanlong, who is a senior research associate at the University of Cambridge, will discuss how to reduce the environmental impact of AI through what he calls green algorithm. So I guess, so Olivier.
So you allow me to speak.
And you have
between.
here. Sorry?
You allow me to speak from here, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea. The table is round.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So you have between like 7 minutes to make your
Okay. Well, thank you for calling me here. I'm not really a specialist of the topic, but I have perhaps a little bit of an overview, which could be helpful to my colleague who are more specialized. So, my specialty is supercomputing. So in a way, AI and supercomputing have similarities. You know that in AI, you have two things. You have the training and you have the, how do you call it? I forgot the name in English. Inference, right? So training is by supercomputing nowadays, more and more, but it's still much less than what is done by physicists, and so at the moment it's not a problem, but it might be. Inference is done, or it's going to be more and more done in data center. So we'll talk about more about data centers. So energy in Europe, in particular. But before, as you say, Michel, there are three problems to AI for the wealth of the planet: is rare earth material, recycling of equipment, obsolete equipment, and energy spending. So currently on energy spending, anything that has to do with digital is about 3% of the total energy produced for our human activities. And out of this 3%, we forget, or very often we forget that 1% is your television streaming. So data center is 2%. And it of course is going to, it's most likely going to increase in 5 years to 5%. And data centers, what do? They do quite a bit of cryptocurrencies, bitcoins in particular. And of course, they will do more and more artificial intelligence. Now, you have to keep in mind that 3% is small. I recall to you that transport is 30%. Air travel, which is very much looked down upon, is also only 3%. And industry is 30%. So concrete, aluminium, chemicals. Agriculture, 15%. Heating and cooling, 20%. So, so even though, you know, you will get a lot of criticism from the, from the layman or from the press because you are spending a lot of energy, then you still have to remember is that it's only 3%. But this 3% can't be outrageous. Bitcoin is using as much electricity as the whole of Holland in 1 year. So that's crazy. It's crazy because the reason it's using so much energy is because for the safety of the Bitcoin, it used an algorithm which is called the proof of work, and that is very costly. And we know now that Ethereum, the other cryptocurrency, the second cryptocurrency, Ethereum, is using a new concept which is called the proof of stake, preuve de consensus in French, and it's at least 1,000 times cheaper. So this is something to learn, that even though Bitcoin is really crazy, it should be stopped immediately. The attempt to regulate Bitcoin has failed. When there is money, energy and cleanliness comes second. It's a very sad statement. So it's probably the same thing will happen with AI. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Bitcoins, because we made the Academy of Technology released a report on blockchain, and Bitcoin is one of it. So China tried to regulate Bitcoins. It forbid mining. Consequence, all Chinese miners went to Kazakhstan. They didn't go to physically, they just opened an office in Kazakhstan. Texas has found that mining is good money. The consequence, and Texas is not a particularly good place for mining, and it has found that it makes the electricity companies, which are private, make more money in giving electricity to miners than to give it to the citizens. And last year there was a crisis in which there was no electricity left for the common people. And still, the current government is encouraging Texas to increase its create new data centers. So some data centers have moved to greener place, but like Iceland and Canada. But I am a bit pessimistic. I don't think they've done it for the better planet. They've done it because electricity is cheaper. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, they all say that they will switch to nuclear energy. But instead of being practical, they want to buy this new technology, which is called SMR, small and medium reactor. And these things won't be in the market within 15 years. So I think they are just not credible in this good move. On the other hand, France is in a good position for that. And this was stressed by Macron 2 weeks ago, when, because France has an excess of nuclear energy, which is green, not for everybody, but for most people. So, my time is probably over, but on the positive side, let's be optimistic. AI requires a small number of operations on each data, and consequently, the current architecture of the chips is not good. So people are trying to design chips for which the data doesn't move to the CPU. The CPU is on the memory. We are seeing also tremendous progress in software for AI, as shown by DeepSeek, making also smaller neural network and goal-oriented neural network. On the production of electricity, renewable energy is, like solar, is already the cheapest energy. The problem for using it for data center is that it has intermittencies. There's no solar at night, And so you need to have a switchable electrolyzer, and at the moment there are no switchable electrolyzer. You cannot switch it on a short time scale. So a lot of money is going for research on that. So my conclusion is that on the hardware, on the software, and on the making of electricity, research will give us solution. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll wait for the end of the panelists for the questions. So next is Gabrielle Ferrat from Mirova.
Very happy to be here. Thank you. So just a quick word on Mirova, maybe to start. So we are an asset manager dedicated to responsible investment. We are part of the Natixis and BPC group. We manage both listed assets and private assets, and around 30 billion of euros under management as of today. So from its creation, Mirova has been really focused on supporting the companies and the projects that contribute to sustainable development. So it was quite natural for us to position ourselves on this topic of AI, who's going to be transformational for our economies, and saying that this technology is not just a tool for productivity, but also really something that can be very powerful to accelerate our response to social and great challenge that we have ahead of us. So what we can do very concretely as investors, it's first, by selecting in our investment process companies that develop AI-driven tools for sustainable use case, which we called AI for sustainability. And the other way we have is through our engagement. So as investor, we can open the dialogue with companies and try to promote the best ESG practice to tech companies, and try to ultimately decrease the risks that the fast development of this technology puts on our planetary boundaries. So first, strictly, we've mainly see the ICT companies at Mirova mainly as contributors on the social side, on social SDGs, because of the very critical importance of those companies to provide internet access, and then it's a catalyst for social economic development. The link between tech companies and positive climate impacts is, let's say, maybe less obvious because of two things. First of all, the tech companies are mainly, they are enablers. Their tools enable other sectors to decarbonize. So they are pretty early in the value chain. And then the application, basically the impact of the same technology can have very different applications and effects depending on where and how it's applied. And also the net positive gains on climate of the digital sector is not so consensual because we have something, a relation in the tech sector that is saying that if you bring more efficiency, it also means more power and also drives more demand for the technology. So this is what we call the rebound effect. So what we try to do then at Mirova to select companies in that climate thematic is really to have strong stock picking and try to support the company that have visibility on their end markets. So they're gonna bring their technologies to end markets where we see ESG opportunities like EVs or renewable or smart buildings, etc. And the second thing is also that we believe that internally, if those technology companies have robust climate practices and have committed to decrease their carbon emissions with science-based target, and that they're beginning to deliver on their commitments, it's also a strong lever for us of impact. So with AI, I think, and the development of generative AI more specifically, I think it's interesting because it puts more interest on this sector's potential for sustainability. We've seen, and the private sector is quite seizing these opportunities, and we've seen a lot of companies, providing AI tools for better electrification of society, for resource optimization, for climate adaptation, biodiversity conservation. There's a lot of use cases also on the social side with tailored education or drug discovery, etc. So I think, it brings definitely a lot of opportunities, but like you both said, also comes with high risk. And we talk a little bit about the climate and environmental risk, but maybe the fact that this technology has been developing so fast, it's been like the fastest adopted ChatGPT, the fastest adopted technology in history. It reached like 100 million users in just 2 months, so that's kind of crazy. So it's going very fast, and it's exacerbated the risk that we've already been seeing in the social media sector, for example. So social risk in terms of human capital development, you have ethical risk in terms of bias, disinformation, but also geopolitical risk now for the control of the resource that we need to build the AI chips, and particularly critical minerals. And on the environmental side, so there's a lot of scrutiny today around data centers and their consumption of energy, which is also really key. But I think it's interesting to take the full picture here, because there's also, and maybe more in terms of magnitude, impacts in all the carbon that is embedded in the manufacturing phase of the chips, and also the carbon embedded in, when you want to build your data center infrastructures. It also means more concrete, more steel, etc. So there's still a lot of uncertainties, the pace of adoption of AI, the pace of renewable energy development, if we're going to have or not more frugal AI models. But I think we have also ways of being optimistic. And just a word maybe on engagement, if I have time, just saying that we are trying to really push for dialogue on that digital transformation and AI teams to the company that we have in our portfolios, whether individually or collaboratively. And we also have a research center within Mirova which studies this thematic.
Thank you. Again, we'll end until we'll wait until the end of the introductory speeches before taking questions. Okay. So Laetitia, next.
Hello. So I'm responsible for the data and innovation for Natixis CIB. So for us, AI is not new. I mean, we have already worked in AI since several years, but what is changing today is with generative AI, it's a kind of revolution, because now we can really analyze tons of unstructured data in a way that is much faster than what we have before. And at Natixis, we have several use cases. We have more than 50 use cases today in development. We can see that we have a use case around document intelligence and content generation, for sure. This is extracting data from PDF, for example. We have also some use cases around process automation, a lot around the onboarding process to accelerate our client onboarding. This is very important for us. And then we have also some predictive analysis on future prices, for example, for electricity, and also on, of course, fraud detection for risk and compliance. If I can take also some example related to ESG, the main objective is to collect data quickly from different sources, for example, from public sources and from internal data. One example is to extract the data from the disclosure and the commitment from the client to assess their transition plan. We also gather some information around the news and also some other corporate reports to go very fast to extract the data. With our risk ESG also, we will upgrade their monitoring tool to make sure that we can compare the client commitments and their actual engagement. So that's also one use case. And also we have several use cases around news to detect some risk, for example. So we use it a lot. I mean, we plan to use it a lot. I think we, as you said, we are conscious. We are also aware that there is a potential in AI, but there is also the downside, which is the energy consumption. We know that the computing power to extract or to analyze data and the use of LLM requires a lot of energy consumption. So we are trying to make also all our teams aware of that. So we have two initiatives at Natixis. The first one is a dashboard where we provide theoretical energy consumption on our application and infrastructure. So it's based on the type of servers, the CPU which is used, etc. And it provides a consumption for the manufacturing and usage. So it's kind of awareness for the IT people to switch the infrastructure if needed. The second one is more on the digital process. So for each IT project, we have a self-assessment that evaluate all the ESG criteria based on the equipment, the training, everything around also the data center. And this is mandatory for all our IT projects. Last point, of course, is the ones that are using the LLM. So we are working a lot with the data scientists to make sure that they have the good practice, for example, to retain only the important data for the inference that will lower the consumption. And also, of course, to identify the good models for the good purpose, because we know that we have a large language model which is very generic, and some others that are more specific. So we know that, and we are trying to push. And just as a conclusion, I will say that for all our AI use case, I mean, we want to be both innovative to accelerate our process, but also sustainable for everyone.
Thank you. Last, Loïc Lalonde, who is going to say everything about green algorithm.
Okay, does that work? Yeah. Great, thank you. Very happy to be here. I don't know if being last is like the easiest or the hardest job, but we'll see how we make that work. I'll try to draw on some of the trends that were mentioned before. If we start with the general numbers, Olivier started mentioning that the ICT sector is around 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which obviously presented like that is not a lot. If we look at all data centers, carbon footprint of all data centers is estimated around 126 megaton of CO2. That doesn't mean anything to anyone. That's about the same as the entire US commercial aviation, which actually is not completely negligible. If we ask most people, should we try to reduce the US commercial aviation, most people would probably say yes, rightfully so. And that's the problem with these big numbers. Like when we look at them aggregated, every small sector only contributes a little bit, and we get to this situation, well, what's the point of working on 3%? Let's tackle the 30%. But then we break down the 30% and we have just a sum of different 3% again. So if we look at individual models, if we take something like ChatGPT, so OpenAI has been very careful to make sure no one can figure out the energy consumption of ChatGPT. But let's take GPT-3, so that's the last model they published before it became ChatGPT. Training it just once doesn't include research, doesn't include development, doesn't include retraining it. We're talking 550 tons of CO2. The IPCC target to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees is 2 tons per year per person. So that's quite a lot of, that's quite a few people yearly allocation just to train the model once. Obviously the model doesn't get trained once, it gets trained every week. There seems to be a new version, not always quite as good as the previous one, but that's the idea. And that's usually what's relevant to people training models. How do we think about what models we need to train, what models we need to use, and which ones we don't? And that's one way. We keep talking about cost and benefits because obviously that's only touching on energy usage. The other panelists mentioned before, the whole cost of embodied impact is a whole other problem. Water usage is something that we don't really understand, mostly because data center providers don't really want us to understand that too much. It's not very popular, but in Chile, they had to give up on building new data centers because there was just not enough water for the population there, so that data centers couldn't be built. Data centers in Ireland, that's about 20% of the national grid, electricity grid. So they just can't build new data centers because otherwise, they have to turn off the electricity for entire neighborhoods. We can also talk about inference versus training. What is the proportion? It really depends. A very specific model, something very skilled that you would use maybe in finance, the bulk of the cost is most likely going to be training. Something like ChatGPT, where you have 100 million of users very quickly, the bulk of it will be inference. And there's just no one size fits all. We just need to think about how we approach this problem on a case-by-case basis. So really what we're talking about is cost and benefit, right? Is making sure that the models we build bring a greater benefit to society, however you define that, than what it costs, including environmental cost. We heard about rebound effect before, and that's a really important thing, is we can make hardware more efficient. We can make models smaller and less energy demanding. That's not going to work, right? We know we have this wonderful paradox over the past 20 years that every single year data centers and computing hardware became more and more energy efficient, and the carbon footprint of the sector kept growing every year. So clearly this idea that we can just rely on energy efficiency is not going to cut it. Google reported a 50% increase in their carbon footprint since 2020, Microsoft 30% since 2021. All of that due to AI, basically, despite all these companies being on very sharp net zero trajectory until then. And then they've acknowledged it's because of AI and basically giving up on their net zero target. So that's what we tried to do with this Green Algorithm Initiative, was to say, okay, well, it's all great to rely on efficiency. And I'm not saying efficiency is bad. It's a great thing. It enables more research to be done. But we need to empower people building the models, people deploying them, people actually using them to make decisions about what they want to do. So we created this online calculator to start with, which is kind of a bit like when you have a flight calculator where you say, what's my carbon footprint to fly from Paris to New York? Well, it's something a bit similar. You say, I'm using that much computing resources, my model takes that long to run, and this gives estimates of carbon footprint. If you're interested, it's all online and it's all open source. And then we expanded with other tools. But really the idea of that was to empower practitioners to make the right decisions and decide whether they wanted to build something or not. And an interesting use case actually happened in France after that, when the French Department for the Ecological, Ecological Transition, so Department for the Environment, decided to use it. So as part of France 2030, so this national plan for technological innovation, they decided that for one of their funding calls, something around AI and climate, how to use AI to optimize, your town's energy grid or the local pool's heating system, something like that. They said, as part of your application, you have to estimate what the carbon footprint of the AI solution you propose is, which is a reasonable estimate, right? If you're saying, my model is going to reduce the carbon footprint of our city, you should be able to justify that actually you're not going to burn more carbon just to train the model in the first place, that it's, it's a net positive result. And so they asked all the applicants to do it using our calculator because it was kind of easy to use. It worked well for what they wanted. And it's been a really interesting use case of it just worked. a lot of the pushback usually is to say, well, we're not quite ready, we don't have the tools, people are not ready to do it. But in a case like that, it turned out, no, we are ready to do it. And it worked so well, actually, that they decided to expand it to all the AI and climate funding coming out of France 2030 now. So that's an interesting example when working with companies of how to having these cost and benefit considerations. Because at the end of the day, that's a way to put pressure on, well, depending if you're working with companies, then you put pressure on companies. If you work with researchers, it's more them directly. But finding this balance on how to bring users, and these users can either be researchers or can be end users, if we're talking about people using ChatGPT, for example, and how could we put them back to the center of the debate to really empower them to make the decision? A good example is to say, well, the number is probably completely wrong, actually, but the number you've probably seen is doing a ChatGPT query is about 10 times worse for the environment than Google. I haven't seen a single number like that that was actually sensibly obtained, but it's worse than Google, we know that. And that's great. People can make a informed decision. Unless, I don't know if you've tried to Google something recently and starting your query by how to or something like that, then the first thing you get is a Gemini-generated prompt, which is exactly the same thing you would get with ChatGPT, but that's Google's AI that kind of explains you how to do it. So suddenly you don't have a choice anymore, because even if you use Google, you're kind of using LLMs as well. So how can we, empower people to make the decisions? And I'll kind of leave that open for the debate.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll take questions. I have a question to Gabrielle. How difficult it is for Mirova to convince companies to reduce their environmental footprint? And then another question is, how do you detect greenwashing at your potential investment target?
Yeah, it is quite difficult sometimes to engage with company, and we talk about big tech corporations that have a lot of shareholders that are not always open to dialogue. But what we do in that case is also join force with other investors and, try to engage collaboratively. So that's one thing. And also use our vote, which is also something that is quite powerful. And what we have been doing very recently, actually, is for one of the major chip manufacturers, we've filed a shareholder proposal on critical minerals, asking for more transparency, and we achieved. We withdrew this proposal and achieved from the company some commitments on their end, and it was a company with which we could not have individual dialogue before, so that's really a win that we have achieved. And then the question on greenwashing is that we do have a very qualitative assessment when looking at companies' sustainability practices. We really go really deep and having constant dialogue with them and trying to detect if they're on track to deliver on their commitments, or if we see alerts. In that case, we increase the level of risk, and then it can be also a motive of these investments.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yeah, I know. Just a couple of questions. Huh? Where? Oh, yes. Okay. Can you? Tu peux les porter. Il va venir.
Thank you very much. I wanted to know regarding your research on the quanting things, because there is a lot of data. There is also one of the objectives is to save energy. In France, in intelligence artificial, we are a little bit forward. Some people say that we are not taking the right train, but we are still enough competitive in the quantum things. So have you ever heard about inside your company, have some use case that you're working on and the impact Have you already evaluated those things? Thank you very much.
It's on quantum computing, correct? Yeah. Okay. So yes, at Natixis, we, I mean, it's a lot of push. There's a big push on in BPC to work on this subject. So we had several seminars inside the company to see what's around, what exists, and who can use it. We have started some use cases, much more around risk, because we can see that we have some capabilities to go faster in the computing in some calculation. But yes, it's something that we see, but the horizon is quite far. So we put first AI on top priority, and they are linked exactly. But the problem of the quantum computing is that it will trigger us. We will need to rework all our algorithm and etc. So it's a lot of work, and we need to be prepared. So we are in this discussion today.
The last question, because we are late, and then we'll move to the parallel sessions. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for your discussion. A very brief question. What is your position on carbon pricing and internalization of environmental costs? Thank you.
Who's taking the...
I think it's a good idea. You know, in Europe, I have seen a great impact of the legislation for curbing all these excesses and trying to be more to reduce the carbon footprint. The problem is that you have seen yourself that there are laws for your buildings and for your heating system, which so it's easy to make a law where you pay, but it's harder to make a law where the state pays. That's the general comment. But I think that in Europe, it's good what they do.
Okay, I would like to thank our panelists for their insights, and we're going now to move to the parallel sessions, right? All right. Merci. Merci.
Nicole est arrivée. Nicole est arrivée.
Ah, elle est où?
Bon. Bon.
Merci.
Moi, je reste quand même persuadé que le coût et le profit sont les deux seuls.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay.
C'était très bien.
C'était intéressant.
Ah, c'était super. Bon, j'ai revu Vidal.
Oui, on se dit. Ouais.
Je te dis que tu restes là de toute façon.
Oui, je reste jusqu'à la fin. Je connais un peu par cœur. La fin, c'est vers quelle heure?
C'est 19h la fin. Enfin, non, mais 2h de retard. On va enchaîner. Ah bah oui, on a bien.
Good afternoon, everyone. We might want to start in a couple of minutes if you agree. All right, so thank you very much for joining this session on climate finance. We are very happy to have 4 very nice papers, and it's just for the reminder, we have 20 minutes for each presentant and 15 minutes for the discussant of the joint papers, and roughly 5 minutes for the questions. So I leave the floor to Thomas Giraud. Thomas, thank you for this presentation on blended finance.
Hello. Does this work? Yes? Okay. Let me just start, because I'm really glad to be here first, and thank you everyone for your time. I will present you a project with Professor Caroline Flammer and Jeff Hill from Columbia University, and as the title suggests, it investigates the emerging practice of blended finance. How should I change the slides? Okay. Well, pretty much the idea is to begin with a quick introduction on the topic of blended finance so that you better understand what we are investigating here, and then delve into the paper itself. Okay, let me continue anyway. So the first slide in the introduction, the goal was to just stress again why we have to urgently take action to mitigate and adapt against climate change and biodiversity loss, among other grand societal challenges that we face. And on the left side of the slide, there is, you will see later on, there is a figure that I took from a paper published in Nature last year that shows that countries with the lowest GDP per capita and the lowest responsibility in current global warming will be the ones suffering the most from it. And this is just one illustration again of the consequences of global warming for our societies and of the great societal injustice that it creates and that we need to address. Then on the right side of the slide that you don't see yet, I just wanted to stress again why we also have to address the biodiversity crisis that we face today. And I just gave several examples. The first one is the scale of the crisis. The World Wildlife Fund estimates that about 70% of the global wildlife population has declined in the past. Okay, the next slide was the right one. Has declined in the past 50 years. So just to tell you how big is this collapse in nature. Thank you. And that this creates existential threats to our economies, as the World Bank estimates that more than 50% of the world GDP either directly or indirectly depends on nature and the ecosystem services that it provides. And finally, climate and biodiversity are deeply intertwined. So if we want to achieve our climate goals, then we also have to effectively address the biodiversity crisis. Quickly, the problem with nature and climate is that they are two public goods, and as such, their consumption is non-rival, meaning that it is available to anyone, even those that are not willing to pay for it. And we know from a long-standing literature in public economics that the provisioning of public goods is quite challenging, and the main implication for that is that climate and biodiversity are very likely to be undervalued and underprovided in our economies. So, to try to fight against this, historically, the mitigation and adaptation of climate or biodiversity loss have been financed through public or philanthropic money. But we see today that this is not enough to fix the problem, and we are facing large financing gap to address both climate and biodiversity loss, among other societal challenges that we face. But in addition to this, sorry for the mix-up with the slide. In addition to this, there is another challenge, which is that most of the capital needs are located in the global south, and especially in low-income countries. So in a world where public resources get scarcer every year, while private money flowing into developed financial markets have surged over the past decade, the question is not only how to crowd in more private investments to finance innovative solutions and try to close the financing gap of climate and biodiversity, among others, but also how to make sure that these investments are directed toward the global south and especially the low-income countries. Blended finance, it has emerged as a promising solution over the recent years, and it is the strategic use of concessional capital to leverage private investments, so try to close this financing gap. However, it is not yet a well-understood practice, nor mainstream, and much more needs to be done to help to deploy it at scale. Sorry, I just check whether the slides do move or not. The real objective of blended finance is to subsidize and de-risk private capital by blending it with concessional capital. And by concessional capital, I mean all sorts of financing that are provided below market rate. So you can think about grants, but also loans with a discount rate or financial guarantees, among others. And the aim is to improve the risk-return profile of private investors in order to attract and serve as a catalyst. That's one of the keywords that is being used. Serve as a catalyst for private investments in projects that have strong positive externalities, but that would not be financed otherwise. Now, it can take place in many various ways, either at the project level or at the fund level, either through direct concessional investments or through risk mitigation tools. And it can be, again, ex ante, so while the project is being designed through design and preparation grants, for instance, or also exposed through first loss guarantee, for instance. Let me just give you one example so that you better understand what type of projects we're talking about here. So it's a sustainable cocoa sourcing projects that take place in Côte d'Ivoire and needs to raise 100 million euro in debt with an average maturity of 7 years. The project has several positive impacts on the society and the environment, and as such, it positively contributes to some of the sustainable and development goals. However, as the International Finance Corporation notes, without the support of the blended finance co-investments, the project will not go ahead due to heightened project risk, political risk, and low expected returns. Yet, with a 40 million concessional loan that was provided by the International Finance Corporation, the project was made bankable enough to raise the remaining 60 million from private investors. So this is just an example of a simple blended finance structure at the project level, but I hope it helps you understand a bit more about those projects. Of course, when you de-risk private capital with public or philanthropic money, this raises important questions, like what's the fair share of risk among the different investors, or how to make sure that the scarce pool of concessional capital is used in an efficient way. So to try to answer those questions, most of the concessional capital providers, they follow 3 main criteria. First, non-financial additionality, meaning that their financing should trigger some positive externalities for the society or the environment. Second, financial additionality, meaning that their financing should contribute to close or to fix a market failure, to attract more private investors, and reinforce the commercial sustainability of the project. And finally, third, efficiency, meaning that they should provide a degree of concessionality that is minimized in order to not over-subsidize private investors. Unfortunately, much more needs to be done in order to break down the barriers that prevent blended finance to deploy at scale. And there is today very little in the literature about blended finance. So to the best of my knowledge, there are mostly 2 papers that address this topic yet. One from Cotran and Vogt, published in 2023, and the other one is another paper I published with the same co-author earlier this year. I think this lack in the current literature is likely due to a lack of awareness about the practice itself, so it needs more visibility, and then also a lack of available data to conduct empirical analysis. So in this study, we take the perspective of a public concessionary capital provider, namely a development finance institution, and we contribute to the literature in 2 ways. First, we provide a conceptual framework that formalizes the decision-making process to allocate concessionary capital, And then we test this framework on real-world data, and we try to provide insights about current practice in blended finance. So let me delve into the first section, which is the conceptual framework. First, a graphical analysis. So let's consider a set of projects that have both financial expected return for private investors and societal expected return for the society. We can define projects with positive or negative externalities, depending on where they lie on the graph compared to the 45-degree line. Since we take the perspective of a public concessionary capital provider, we are interested in projects which have positive externalities. Now we make three assumptions. First, we assume that private investors have a minimum financial expected return that we call the private hurdle rate, and we assume that below this they would not invest in the project. And then the second assumption is that for all projects that yield a financial return that is higher than the private hurdle rate, we assume that there is no financing constraint. The third assumption is that development finance institutions also have a societal, like a minimum societal expected return that we call the public hurdle rate. Now we can consider one project, one example in each of the sub-area of the chart. I will try to be quick, sorry. So project 1, 2, and 3 have negative externalities and therefore are just not relevant for the development finance institution. Project 4 and 5 and 6 have positive externalities, but project 4 doesn't yield sufficient societal impact return to be of interest for the development finance institution because it is below the public hurdle rate, while project 5 has everything. It has sufficient positive externalities, and it also yields a high enough financial rate of return for private investors, so it is fully invested by private investors, and thus not relevant for blended finance. So we are only left with project 6, which has strong positive externalities, but on the other hand, it doesn't yield sufficient financial return for private investors to invest in the project, and thus additional incentives are needed. And this additional incentive is the degree of concessionality that should be provided to the project, and which should be such that the modified rate of return equals the private hurdle rate and no more, in order to not over-subsidize private investors. So the degree of concessionality can be represented by the orange arrow on the chart. So you can see from this analysis that there is a set of relevant projects for blended finance, and since we know that the pool of concessional capital is limited, there is budget constraints, then the next question is how to best allocate it within these relevant investment opportunities. And in some cases, it's quite straightforward. If you consider two projects that have the same societal expected return, but not the same financial expected return, then the projects which will require the lowest degree of concessionality, will dominate the other. But in some other cases, this is less obvious. If you consider project 1 and 2 here, they don't have the same level of positive externalities, but they also don't require the same degree of concessionality to attract private investors. Hence, it is not obvious which project would dominate the other. However, one thing makes sense, which is that all else equal, development finance institution would provide a higher degree of concessionality for projects with higher sustainability impact. And this is the first hypothesis that we aim to test empirically. Now, as I said earlier, most of the capital needs are located in the global south and especially in low-income countries. And for investors trying to invest in this market, there are additional risk factors that they face, such as country risk, which can be political risk or currency risk, for instance, as well as higher information asymmetry, maybe because there is a misperception of the market, or a lack of transparency in business, among others. So to compensate for those risks, private investors will require a higher financial return, which will increase the private hurdle rate, and as such increase the level of concessionality needed for the projects. So this is the second hypothesis that we aim to test empirically, which is that all else equal, development finance institutions would provide a higher degree of concessionality for projects with higher country risk or higher information asymmetry. Now, in the paper, we do formalize this in a model, but for the sake of time, and because I will really need it, I will skip directly to the empirical analysis. First, I will tell you a bit more about the data, and then delve into the analysis itself and the results. So we collect data from the International Finance Corporation, which is one of the largest development finance institutions in the world, and it is the arm of the World Bank to invest in private markets with the aim to advance the achievement of the Sustainable and Development Goals. We collect 173 deals from the IFC data that range from 2018 to 2023 and that are labeled by the IFC as blended finance. For each of those deals, we collect the financing structure, the impact assessment of the project, as well as the degree of concessionality, which is expressed in grant equivalent, so easy to use as it is a percentage of the total project cost. Now, most of the deals are still ongoing because the maturity is quite long, 7, 10 to 15 years, and therefore we only have ex-ante metrics and nothing about realized impact or realized returns. We have to build 2 custom variables to conduct the analysis. The first one is that we need a quantitative proxy for the impact of the projects because all we have in the data is a qualitative assessment. So what we do is we just count the number of SDG a project positively contributes to, and we further distinguish between economic-related SDGs, such as 8 and 9 that you can see on the slide, versus more environmental and social-related SDGs. The second custom metric that we build is a dummy variable that just equals 1 if risk mitigation tools are also implemented alongside the project. First, looking at the data, we are relieved to see that most of the projects are invested in the global south and especially in low-income countries, as about 50% of the projects are invested in Africa, followed then by Asia and Latin America. We see that loans are often preferred to equity in form of traditional financing, and maybe more interestingly that about 1/3 of the projects also require risk management tools alongside other type of financing. Looking at the industries where the projects are invested, the first thing we see is that over half of the projects are invested through the financial sectors, so 1/3 financial institution, a third party. And it makes sense because one of the mandates of the IFC is to strengthen the financial sectors in emerging markets. 5 minutes, yeah. And then we see that the most prevalent industrial sectors are infrastructure and manufacturing, and then agriculture and industry, which again reflects the economies in the global south. Looking at the SDGs, where the projects are invested, it's pretty much in line. And since I have limited time, I will just say that there seems to be room for improvement to target more sustainable goals rather than economic-related objectives. Now, regarding the methodology, we want to test empirically our 2 hypotheses that I mentioned before. So to do this, we conduct regression. On the first one, for instance, we regress the level of concessionality provided to the project on its level of sustainable impact, and we add some fixed effect to take into account for endogeneity. The first thing we see is that empirically the results tend to support our conceptual framework as we observe that the degree of concessionality increases with the level of sustainable impact of the projects. And this is, interestingly, especially true for projects that have environmental or social related impact rather than just economic related one. And it tends to make sense because for the latter, there tend to be more mature market and thus less market failure to fix and a lower need for concessionality. Now, if you remember the 2 extensions that I mentioned, we also want to test for country risk and information asymmetry. So we do this using a proxy of political risk as defined by the World Bank, and we see that the degree of concessionality do increase with the level of political risk, as well as the use of risk management provision that also increases with the level of political risk. We find similar results for information asymmetry, where we take a proxy of this that is an opacity metric provided by the Open Data Inventory. Okay, in the paper we do some other things, but since the time is almost finished, I will go straight to the conclusion. So to quickly wrap up, what we see is that there is a huge financing gap that needs to be addressed, and that especially in the global south, and that blended finance might be a promising approach, so we want to challenge current practice. And what we find is that, yes, the degree of concessionality seems to increase with the level of impact of the project, as well as their level of risk, which is in line with the conceptual framework that we develop. And we also see that risk mitigation tools are critical alongside direct investment forms. And as such, it suggests that blended finance can serve as a catalyst for private investors to invest in projects with strong positive externalities in emerging countries that would not have been financed otherwise. Now, blended finance didn't fix the problem yet, and even though it has existing for several years already, so there are a lot of other barriers that needs to be addressed, and just based on my different conversation, I have here summarized it in 4. The first one is that the global financial regulation needs to be aligned with the climate agenda. There is also an issue with credit rating methodologies, which yet doesn't reflect the true mitigation of risk provided by blended finance structure. Then a strong issue with misperception of risk and opportunities in the global south. And finally, there is a need for standardization to increase the replicability and scalability of the project and the strategies themselves. Making progress on those fronts would really help our society and planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So the next speaker will be Anouk Faverjon from Dauphine. And then we'll have a joint discussion of both papers by Gunther.
Could I have my slides, maybe? Ah, perfect. Okay. Thank you. So it's actually the first time I'm presenting this paper. So I hope you like it, and I really look forward to your comments. So this is a paper that I'm writing with both my supervisor, Marie Lambert and Serge Darol, and it's about the capacity of funds to time the ESG scores. So first thing that maybe a lot of you know, since this is a climate session, is that investing through ESG score is very important. That's, in fact, the most important strategy done by ESG funds. And on the other side, ESG ratings are relatively low frequency. Like here you have the 4 major ESG providers. S&P Global is updated only once a year, and for the other one, you have 1 major update, and then you can have minor updates due to controversies or change in methodology, but it's relatively rare. Most of the time, it's just once a year. So it provides opportunity for timing, then. That's what I want to show you. And why it would be nice to be able to time them. It's because there is an impact on prices. There is this paper by Berg and the co-authors showing that when an ESG score changes, the price tends to react. And they react in the next 2 years. So if you invest before this increase in price, well, you benefit from the momentum effect. If you invest in it, less. So it could be an idea to time this score. Then the next question is, how is it possible to time these scores? And here we noticed that even if the scores are published after the report, the raw data are available before the ESG score. In particular, here you have the example of Apple. With Apple, all the ESG reports are published in September. And so in September, you have access to all the data, the carbon emission, the gender gap. You have access to all of this, which are used to create the rating, but you do not have access to the rating yet. The rating are going to arrive much after. For MSCI, it's 3 months after. For Morningstar, S&P, it's 5 months after. And the last update for Refinitiv have not come yet. So it takes time. So you have access to everything that you need to construct the rating, but the rating has not come yet. So that's a possibility of timing. That's the core of our paper.
So it's important to show that there is this timing opportunity for the literature. First, because it has an impact on the literature of financial materiality. Most of this literature show that there is an impact on ESG criteria on financial performance. But the results for ESG score are less clear. So if the ESG score takes time to arrive, then that could explain that. We also have results which are important in the field of ESG integration, because we provide more information on how funds react to ESG score. Most of the literature so far have shown that funds take time to react to this score, and we show that some of them manage to do it in advance. And finally, we contribute to a strand on literature which arrived very recently on the ESG skills of funds, and in particular there is a paper by Ceccarelli and co-authors showing that some funds, some asset managers have the capacity to be proactive and to invest in advance. And we build on this paper by showing what are the channels, and we show that this is due to the publication of the data in the report before the publication of a score. So in order to show that, we use an experiment which comes from MSCI. MSCI is a nice empirical framework because they publish the raw data before the ESG score. The raw data of MSCI are available a few weeks to months after the ESG report. And then they take some time to meet with some committee to make sure that the score is fine, and then there is a committee validating it, but it takes some months. So we have a gap between the publication of the raw data and the publication of a score which will come from this data. So that's something that we will use to show that if you invest when the raw data are available, then you can gain from this strategy. So in terms of data, we have access to the scores from MSCI. We use the final ratings. We also have access to the raw data, so that all the data used to construct the score, so that's access to healthcare, anti-competition practice, carbon emission, etc. And then we have some financial data. Everything is coming from CRISP and CompuStats. So our sample is a sample covered by MSCI, so that's a bit more than 3,000 stocks over the period 2022. So that's the period for which the scores are available. And finally, we have some data related to the funds. So this data also come from CRISP. We look at 27,000 and a bit more equity active mutual fund. We remove every index fund from the analysis. We have access to the holdings of the funds and to the daily returns of the funds. So this paper is in two parts. The first part is about the construction of this timing strategy and identification of this timing strategy. And then we identify the funds which are following this strategy and validate that, well, there are some funds that are doing it already. Okay, so the first step that we do is to take all this raw data and reconstruct the rating from it. So basically, we take all the information which is available, past information which is available, train a very simple algorithm, that's a lasso algorithm, to reconstruct the score. And at every period, we do that in order for, at every period, to have what the score would do only according to the raw data. And then we do this estimation. So we have here a bit of a prediction power. So we have a R-square of 16%. That's not much, but still there is some predictive power of this raw data for the ESG scores. And once these data are reconstructed, we can assess, whereas here, according to the raw data, there should be an increase in the score. in the coming weeks. And that's what we look at. So here you have a Cox model which show when there is a predicted update, so according to the raw data it should go up, well, we show that the realized upgrade is coming soon, and there is less chance than the downgrades arrive. And similarly, when there is a predicted downgrade, so we think according to the raw data that a downgrade is going to happen, well, a downgrade is really more likely to happen fast, and an upgrade is less likely to happen. So it's possible to reconstruct the score like that. When we have that, we can construct a strategy. So basically, there are two conditions for going long on a stock. The first condition is that there is an increase in the raw data, in the score predicted by the raw data. So according to the raw data, the score should increase. And the second condition is that the score predicted by the raw data is higher than the actual score. So if these two conditions are met, we think that the score is going to increase, and we take a long position. On the other side, when the raw data, the score predicted by the raw data is going down, and that the score predicted by the raw data is lower than the actual score, we think that the score is going down in a few months, and we take a short position. So that's how we construct the strategy. And then we assess the performance of the strategy. So here you have the cumulative return of the strategy, equally weighted and value weighted. The blue line is the long position, the red one is the short, and the green is the market. So we see some performance, especially in equally weighted portfolio. The performance is less good in value weighted portfolio. We think that that may be due both to the fact that the big stocks are more under scrutiny, and maybe everybody knows about this information. And also, it may be due to the end of a sample, which is a bit particular, and it's during the COVID crisis. But here you have the alpha of the strategy, and you can see that going long in the stock, which are going to increase in ESG score according to the data, and short in the stock, which should have a decreasing ESG score, allows to gain a monthly alpha of around 0.22% with a CAPM. And then what we wanted to do is to compare this strategy, which is a timing strategy, investing before the rating change, to the strategy, the traditional strategy of investing after the change in rating, which we have here. And you can see that investing before the change in rating, it's much better. It brings more performance than investing after the ESG score. So now we have this strategy, which brings some performance. And the big question was, are there some funds which are using this strategy already? And in order to do that, we wanted to identify the funds which are doing this timing strategy, the funds which are investing in advance of a change in ESG rating using the raw data. So in order to do that, we use daily return of a fund and daily return of a strategy, and we regress the return of a fund on the returns of a strategy in order to pick up the one which are exposed to this strategy. So that's the regression that you have here, which is done for every fund and at every quarter. And at every quarter, we can see if the fund is exposed to this strategy or not. We control for false positive because we have a lot of different regression. And we say that a fund is considered to be an ESG timer, so it's exposed to this strategy if we have a beta 1 which is positive and significant at the 10% level. So here you have a distribution of the beta of the funds. And we found that 38.67% of the fund have timed at least once in the period. So the period is 2007-2022. Among this period of timing, there is roughly a third of them which are followed by another period of timing. So we have some persistence here. Also some summary statistics on the funds which are timing. We find that these funds have, on average, higher return. They are bigger, they are older, they have higher fees, and they attract more flows. So in terms of persistence, a bit more result on the persistence of the ESG timing ability. Here you have a graph with, so the red line is the one we never timed, the green one is the one who timed just once, and the blue are the one who have timed more than once. So half of the funds in our sample time more than once in the period. And when we regress the beta, so our coefficient of exposure, on the coefficient of exposure lagged, we see that if you have timed in period t minus 1, you have more chance to time in period t. So there are some persistence in this result. We wanted also to look at when do these funds time. So this graph is the number of funds which have timed in time. So we can see that there is a peak nowadays. So there are more and more funds which are timing the ESG rating, which makes sense as it starts in 2018. So that's the period when ESG rating are becoming more and more important, and ESG strategy also. And we also have some peak around 2015, so that's and 2011, which corresponds to the period of climate awareness. Then in terms of performance, we wanted to make sure that these funds gain from the performance of our strategy. And we find that the funds which are doing the timing are also more performance when they do it. Now the last thing that we wanted to do in this paper was to make sure to validate our measure of timing. So we wanted to make sure that the fund which we have identified are buying share before. So for that, we use the holding of a fund. We use the holding of a fund, and we look at whereas the number of funds held by ESG timer, how does it move around the ESG score updates. So here you have an event study. The red line is the score update, and we see that the ESG timer tend to buy the shares, the stocks which are going to have the ESG rating increase before the ESG re-increase. So we have this effect which happens before the upgrade in scores. And in the second graph, you have the same for the non-ESG timer, and we see that they don't react to ESG rating. Unfortunately, we don't have the same result for the downgrades. For the downgrades, we don't see any change before the downgrades. So the ESG timers do not react so much before the downgrades. So that's something that we are still in process to understand, but it may be due to the fact that shorting the stock is something that you don't see in the holding. So if they short, we don't see it. And if you want to sell a stock, you need to have it, so it's more difficult than buying. And also another possibility would be that these funds only go on the long side and not on the short one. That could be another possibility, but we don't have a result yet. And once again, that's the regression for the event study. So we have the same thing as in the graph. That's the ESG timer are reacting before the upgrade in score and not before the downgrade in score. Okay, so to wrap it up, in this paper we show that the ESG scores takes time to be processed, and that the information that they encompass takes time to be integrated in the ESG score and then into the market. And when they arrive in the ESG score, the market has already processed them. So because of that, it's possible to use the raw data, which will be used to construct the ESG rating, to reconstruct the score in advance, and to take position before the ESG score change. And finally, we show that there are already some funds which are using this strategy and which are investing in advance of a changing in ESG scores. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anouk. So now let us welcome Gunther Capelle-Blancard from Université Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne for a joint discussion of the first two papers.
So thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for the paper. So I have received a preliminary draft of the second paper, but I will try to be useful to both papers. My discussion will be done separately for each paper, of course, because it's difficult to have common comments. So first, the paper Blending Finance. The two papers are very well and very interesting and quite original. So it was a pleasure. Blended Finance was very interesting because I did not know at all about that. And this is the main point in your paper. And as you said in your motivation, we are not aware about that. So of course, this is very, very important for us. And this is, I think, the main point in that paper. But at the same time, this is also the main drawback because maybe you can explain more. You explain what it is, but we have many different instruments today, many new instruments. And what is important for me is to understand why this instrument is different from the other. For instance, my question when I read your paper is, what about PPP? For me, this is something very similar. Why do we need another word, another concept? What are the differences and the advantage of blended finance compared to public-private partnership? This is not clear for me. So the paper is already long. The paper is very pedagogical. I know that, but it raises also a lot of questions, and mainly to compare blended finance with something else. So PPP or even impact bond. I'm not sure to have understood the difference between the instrument. And if you consider blended finance, actually it seems the concept is new, but the idea is not new at all. The public sector, so charity or the government or the World Bank, this is your example, will help. But what is really new in that mechanism, it is not so clear for me for the moment. But I'm sure you will have answer about that. World Bank exists for a long time. So, and your data are from the World Bank. You can consider another example in France, AFD, BPI. BPI do blended finance. For me, this is blended finance, even if I don't know the word. It is like, this is very famous in France, like Molière, I don't remember the name of this very famous author who do prose without knowing that. Monsieur Jourdain, okay. And this is like this. This is the same for blended finance. And so this is my main comment. And I have also some more specific comments, not in a particular order, okay? But the number of SDG, the number of goals, is not a good proxy at all. I'm sure you do not have better proxies, but the number of goals, it is not at all a proxy for quality. So maybe you should think about that. I'm not sure you can have a good answer, but this is a minor comment. Another main comment, it's in your model. I like very much theoretical model. So you do it well. This is smart. This is elegant. This is parsimonious. I like it very much. But again, in comparison with other approach, for instance, in your model, if I introduce not debt But if I introduce a Pigouvian tax, what is the difference? I don't see. And if I am a government, my question is, should I use blended finance? Or maybe I can just use a Pigouvian tax. The framework is very well known. So again, you have to answer, but this is quite similar with my first comment, you know. Why don't you use a Pigouvian tax? And in the model, maybe you can go further also, because in your model, there is no risk of default. But I think this is key, and you talk about that, but I'm sure it is not so difficult to introduce in your model different tranches. A senior tranches, a junior tranches. There is no default, there is no tranches, and I guess this is key in blended finance. So maybe you can develop more the model in that direction, compare with other instruments, a Pigouvian tax, and introduce risk. You do not introduce risk actually in your model. This is very smart. You introduce a risk premium, but there is no risk. There is a risk premium, so because there is a risk premium, you need a higher interest rate, so you need higher, how do you say that, concession. But this is just because you need a higher risk premium, but this is not the same as introducing risk. And a last remark about the econometric approach. This is very well done, but I was surprised that you consider each exogenous variable separately, independently, and I don't know why. It seems very easy to introduce at the same time the impact of political risk and opacity. Why do we have two different tables? I don't know, and I'm sure you have a good reason to do that, or just fix it. It will be more parsimonious. But for the econometric part, it is well done. I do not have anything to add. So this is for the first paper. For the second paper, also very interesting paper, and of course, why it is interesting? Because we have too many papers about the financial aspect of sustainable finance, but we don't care about the financial aspect. This is not the point. What is the point is about the extra financial aspect. So, and this is the idea in that paper to understand the mechanism behind the rating. We have a very famous paper about that, Brière and co-author, for instance, which are very interesting, and you are in that perspective, and this is very, very interesting. But you can go deeper. You can go deeper. We have raw data. This is the main problematic with ESG data. We have many data, and we want a single score. This is the main problem. And so the aggregation is a problem, and we have many papers about that. And you don't say a word about the aggregation. You say, okay, I use a lasso algorithm. But a lasso algorithm is a black box. And I want to know the mechanism behind. And I'm pretty sure they use just an average. So why do you use a very sophisticated technique instead of a simple average? And I'm pretty sure this is an average, maybe a weighted average, but nothing very complex. So maybe you can compare the two. Not very difficult to do, but we will have many insights to understand the process, how to aggregate ESG score. To go inside the black box of the aggregation. A second remark about the endogeneity. We know that, of course, there is a process, and the process is very opaque. So we have raw data, and 1 year after, we have a final score. Okay, and you don't discuss about that, but you are smiling, so you know the point. This is very likely we have manipulation. And the final score depends on past performance. I'm not sure about that, but this is very likely. So again, you can explore this dimension, and it will be, I'm sure, very interesting to see, because I didn't sum up the paper, the presentation was very clear, but remember we have a table to explain the difference between the predicted score and the actual score. And you can include, for instance, past performance. You can also include many control variables, the size of the company, so you can go deeper in this black box by studying manipulation, for example. Maybe I can use that. Okay, no, I thought this was your presentation. I'm sorry, thank you. Okay, this is not the good paper because you have changed a little bit. That is not a problem, but the problem stays the same. There is a problem with the number of stocks. I didn't understand why. Maybe this is just a typo, but we can. Okay, this is fixed. And so the figure is different now, but I still don't understand. You say in this figure that the mean is 0.45, but this is impossible. When we have such distribution, you cannot have a mean like that. So maybe I didn't understand the figure, or there is a problem with the mean. So you have changed it. This is not the same number, but how is it possible to have a mean which is not in the middle somewhere?
Way to fix that, and that's true that this figure is will not be final, but the idea is you have a distribution of a beta, and the mean is the mean beta for the significant one. So that's why it's a bit, but it's not clear.
This is not clear. Okay. No, but it is not very important. Okay. So Again, I did not realize that my slide was on the screen, so I'm sorry, but about my previous comment, I come back to that comment. You can do more to explain the delay between predicted and actual score, and maybe we have some catch-up effect. And of course, why a catch-up effect? Because if there is a large difference, we can expect an upgrade, which is more likely. If the difference is very low, you know, there is a classic trade-off. We want a precise measure, but we don't want also a measure which changes every time, every day, of course. So there is a trade-off, and for small differences, there is no update. For large differences, there is an update. So this is something you can test very easily. So I don't remember what. Okay. Yes, some comments also. There are a lot of tables, so it's easy to have many comments. About the update, I was very surprised by the low number of updates. Only 5 updates in average for 16 years. So one update every 3 years. This is very, very low. Okay, I'm not sure I was right, but this is so low, and do we have any explanation about that? Maybe they are just lazy. This is not clear, but okay. Maybe you can develop a little bit. And also, when there is no update, I want to know why. 2 reasons are possible. First, there is no update because we do an assessment, a new one, but nothing changed, and this is good. Or maybe we don't do any new assessment, and this is a spurious stability. So I don't know if you have information about that to explain the no update, but it could be interesting to have information about that. Okay, and last comment, because I'm late. Maybe you over-interpret a little bit the results. In my view, when I read the paper, and it is not a problem at all, but this is not very significant. You have shown that a value-weighted portfolio does not provide any significant improvement. So don't be shy. If there is no significant improvement, and maybe you just correct a little bit interpretation. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Gunther. So we have roughly 5 minutes for questions from the audience, so don't hesitate if you have any question. You want to reply to something? I have a question.
So thanks a lot for your comments, because they are really close from what I've heard so far. So I think they are really meaningful. About the definition of blended finance versus other sorts of similar tools, let's say, I think it's true. We need to do more to clarify exactly what we're talking about here. So we're working on a normative paper at the moment, which will help with that. Really what I can say, in my mind, it's different actors. It's really targeting emerging countries in the global south, and it's different tools than public-private partnerships, for instance. Plus, philanthropies, they do not only provide grants, but also they invest in the projects, which is not something they are used to, but it's emerging. So that's why I think blended finance is a specific topic, but I agree we need to document it a bit more. But we can also draw lines with existing things like development aid. And for instance, to build track record for blended finance, we are looking at the GEM database, which is a database that provides probability of default for development aid, for instance. So that's one way of doing it. And just to say, on the model, we are working to include risk in the model. And finally, for the econometrics and the paper, that's right, we just didn't do it in the first place because we thought about two different things. Now we will do it at some point. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Thank you. So, two very interesting papers. Maybe a few questions for Annick. So, it's I think very interesting, and the first time I see that you're looking at the timing ability of these ESG scores. So I like the idea very much. And I was wondering, when you say that, for example, for large stocks, that doesn't work that much, it may be also that the raw data are also forecastable, because it's also an aggregation of raw indicators. So maybe for large stocks, because there is public information also from earnings call and many information that is published by the company itself, there is a possibility to forecast the raw indicators. So maybe you could look also in an even study of what's happening before. And also, so I liked your discussion, Gunther. There are these two dimensions, right? The first is what you can explain with a lasso regression. It's a way, the way I understand it is that you don't have the MSCI methodology. It's not transparent. So you're trying to infer it from this lasso regression to select what are the right criteria. So what you cannot explain is what's untransparent in MSCI method. But maybe some investors still, because they are and I tried that, spending a lot of time with the rating agency to understand what they're exactly doing, and I know how hard it is, but maybe some people are more successful than I am, and some investors, some funds are able to infer the weighting changes because they have good relationship with the rating agency, etc. So maybe you should also look at your forecasting error and see if some investors are able to time the changing methodologies of the rating agencies. I think the two dimensions could be interesting to look at. And also maybe it depends on the rating agencies, because some are more transparent than the others. You're looking at MSCI, which might not be the most transparent one, but it could be interesting to expand that as well. So very interesting and a lot more to discover, I'm sure.
Will maybe explain a bit also, because for the big one, I guess that it's more important. So, yeah, also, so that's something that we can do for sure, and also for the methodology of MSCI, that's true. It's super blurry. Well, that's how they make money. So I guess they don't want to disclose everything. We know that it's more complicated than an average. unfortunately. But there are some other providers. I'm thinking of Refinitiv. There we know that it's a weighted average. MSCI, they use a matrix, which is proprietary. What we wanted to do is really doing the simplest thing possible to make sure that asset manager can do it. So I think we can try the average too, because we wanted to keep it simple and not to go into too complicated things. But the reason why we use MSCI is because we have this lag between the raw data and the score. For the other provider, they publish the score at the same time as the raw data. The raw data are available in the reports, but we don't have access to them yet. So that's why we use MSCI as an experiment. But yeah, that's. Yeah, because there are other papers. I'm thinking of D'Amato and co-authors, or there is also Awadi and Ma. Some other paper who are doing the same kind of forecasting exercise, and they go way beyond. Like they use neural networks, etc. They compare between different, but they mostly use Refinitiv, and they find very good forecasts. But I mean, that's the easier to forecast. There is no timing gap, so that makes sense that their forecast is very good. And yeah, it would be interesting to see like the difference between the provider. That's true. And I think we have tried to do it between Refinitiv and MSCI, and yes, Refinitiv is much easier to forecast than MSCI.
You can keep MSCI, it's fine. That the forecasting error itself. This is very interesting. Yeah. So
okay.
It might be strategic, as you say, because they're trying themselves to change the weight in the direction, for example.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Okay.
Error? You see, is interesting.
Okay, yeah, I understand. Sorry, and I didn't pick also when you talk about change in methodology, but I think that's interesting. Yes, that we can look at that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for these fruitful discussions. To stay on time, we might move on to the next paper, which is presented by Morad Nourieff. So, the floor is yours.
I thought I was the last paper. I don't know why. So thank you very much. Thank you a lot for this previous papers. Okay, yeah. For the very interesting previous papers for the presenters. So I will be presenting a joint work which is part of my PhD studies and co-authored with my PhD supervisors. So in the paper we are looking at the market valuation of climate patterns. We are having a very exploratory look at the data and through the perspective of what are the most valuable innovations for the investors in the climate space. Okay, so the many transition strategies basically in the climate change to mitigate the climate change have two components. The first component relies on behavioral changes, which in most general cases implies, of course, reduced economic output. So if we drive less and take fewer planes, we are going to reduce emissions, but also see that in our economic output. The second component then comes from the technological changes, relying on, as we may know, less polluting alternatives, and trying to reduce our emissions in that direction. So, of course, many net zero strategies kind of requires a mix of both. However, one thing that is interesting to note is that the technological part in many net zero scenarios that assume that we are going to reach a net zero by a given time frame actually assumes or requires that we are going to use a lot of technologies that are currently either not in the market or have not even been invented yet. So this makes the pace of innovation for the climate technologies a very important thing to look at. However, maybe unexpectedly, this technological part of the puzzle has borne much more optimistic news compared to the behavioral changes. So we may see that informally when we read the news headlines around the cheapness of solar panels, how ubiquitous they have become, or when we look into the data and look at the number of startups that have been created, especially in Europe, around carbon, energy, and climate. We see an increased pace of innovation in patent filings as well. So that is something that our study is focusing on, the patent filings by public firms. And in this graph, for example, from our sample, we see in the last 2 to 3 decades, the pace of innovation for climate patents have, in a way, outpaced the pace of general patent filing innovation.